Okay, so this is our sample scene here. Let me grab the lights real quick. And I'm just going to show you how to render with layers. It's really not going to be too, I mean, there can be a lot to it. So let me make that clear. But we're not going to cover except for the most important stuff. Okay, so what we need to do is inside your scene, you'll have multiple objects and you'll have multiple lights. And you may not want to render all of the objects and all of the lights at the same time. And so there's a way to split that up. And then in your compositing software, so you've got it all split up, and then afterwards in your rendering software, you can layer these and have more precise control. And so, for instance, I've got a bunch of render layers here. I'll just go ahead and delete all of them except for the main one, the master layer. Okay, so you have, by default, you'll have this master layer, and everything you create in Maya will belong to this master layer. But let's say we want to render the cone with this light only. Okay, so I selected both of them, then I come up here inside the render tab of the layer editor, and I click on this create new layer and assign selected objects. Okay, then I select that layer, and you can see that everything disappears except for my directional light and that cone. Okay, now if I were to render, okay, so let me go to my render settings real quick. Let's try that again. Okay, so it didn't render because I had my output set to image format set to PNG. So I went to my render settings and changed that to my IFF file. Okay, now when it rendered, it only rendered the cone and it only has the single light source. Okay, that can be useful. Okay, so now if I go back to my master layer, I can select this point light, and I can add it to this layer also. And now if I render, let me go back to my render window and render again. Now the cone looks different, right? Because it's got two lights shining on it. Okay. So I'd be able to composite those in my video editing program, or maybe if you're just working on a still image in Photoshop, and you would have more precise control because you could actually do each light individually even if you wanted to. Now this is a collection of both lights right here, but I could create another layer that has just the point light and the cone. Okay, and then I could remove the point light from this layer 1. So I could remove selected object. So now if I were to render, it's going to render two images. This one, the second one, or the first one that I see is the one that rendered with the point light only. And then this one rendered with the directional light only. Okay, now I'm storing a bunch of images down here, and that's why the slider goes further. All the renders that I've done so far are showing up in this window. Okay, now I can control which of these layers renders over here by making sure that this checkbox has the clapboard with the green check mark on it. Okay. Now, that's the most important thing for you to remember for render layers, is you can individualize things with these render layers, and you actually haven't deleted anything at all if you go back to your master layer. Okay. Now, another thing that can be done is you can set all kinds of layer attributes for these different things. Okay, so you could right click on this and you could say add new render pass. Okay, and we could do a beauty pass or an ambient occlusion pass or say a shadow pass where it's going to render only the shadows for that particular shot. Okay, and so we can knock out and separate all kinds of things out of our renders, and then we could go back and recomposite them together in, say, After Effects in our case. And because they're all individual layers, we would have more precise control. We could separate them because they're separate. Then, like, let's say shadows, for instance. If I generate a shadows pass, then I would be able to go through in After Effects and decide how dark those shadows are after I rendered it. And that way I can make sure they match the rest of my scene. Okay. Now I'm not really going to go into any more detail than that, other than you'll need to know how to batch render so that you can render out your entire animation. So I'm going to do a real quick animation of just my camera. Okay, so I'll hit S. S here, and then I'm going to navigate around. We'll hit S there. Okay. Then on frame 11, I don't recommend doing animation this way, but it'll work for my quick example here. Okay, so now I have a little bit of animation. My camera does a really funny movement. And I wanted, let's say this is what I wanted though, and I want to batch render this. So what I have to do is I hold down my space bar and go to Render. If you don't have this lighting, shading, texturing, render menu, then you can get it two different ways. You can go to up here on the top left of the status line and go to Rendering, and then you'll have Render right here in the main menu. Or you can go to your hotbox control, holding down spacebar, go to your hotbox control, and then go to Show Rendering, and then Show Hide Rendering. Or you could even do Rendering Only, and then it would hide all these other menus. But I'm going to leave that how it is. Okay, now I need to go to my render settings. I'm clicking on this little icon here, or I could go to Render. I go to actually Window, Rendering Editors, Render Settings to get this window here. And I want to output. I want to change this frame/animation extension. I need to change it to one that allows multiple files. Okay, so I'm going to do frame number extension. That's what Windows uses. Okay, then we need to make sure we have our image size presets all set correctly for our project. That should be a 720, HD 720.